And welcome to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. Our special guest is author George Weigel. 2 books, Pomp, Circumstance, and Unsolicited Advice, Commencement Addresses and University Lectures. And we'll also talk at the end of the show about To Sanctify the World, the Vital Legacy of Vatican II. And both available through the EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com, for all things Catholic. And great to be with you once again.
Nice to see you, Doug.
And people would have seen you on talking with the great Father Mitch about this as well, and about these particular books. Let me talk about the Pomp and Circumstance and Unsolicited Advice. Now, this is based on commencement speeches you gave over the years, right?
There are a dozen commencement addresses, and then I filled the book out with another dozen lectures I had given in university settings really all over the world that I thought continued the theme of, what is a Catholic university in the 21st century? What does this bring to our civilization? And why Catholic universities are more important now than ever.
Is that why you started with 2000 as being the first one you have in here, May 11, 2000?
Well, it happened to be the first chronologically, and that was one of the first I ever gave, and that's on how to do theology in the image of John Paul II.
And that was at St. Mary's Seminary.
It was at St. Mary's Seminary in Baltimore. I gave something like that as well at Sacred Heart Major Seminary in Detroit, and at St. Vincent Seminary in Latrobe, Pennsylvania.
Do you like doing these?
I like meeting people at them. I like small school commencements because they tend to get over with more quickly. I've done some commencements where you give your little talk and then you sit there and you watch a parade of 300 really strange-looking shoes on young women going across the stage, and that can get a bit tiresome. But I'm always grateful for the invitations to meet young people and their parents.
Well, one of the points you make out in the very beginning is that the Catholic Church invented the university, and one of the things you kind of bemoan is the lack of debate these days. Why?
American higher education has been in crisis, I think, for 2 generations. And that crisis is encapsulated in, I believe, something I quote in the book, which was the inaugural address of Drew Faust, a very distinguished Civil War historian, when she became the president of Harvard, I think 20 years ago. And she said, truth is not a possession, it's an aspiration. Well, no, that's not really right. And it's not just true about mathematics or physics or chemistry or whatever. There are moral truths built into the world and into us. There are truths revealed by literature about the human condition. And if you think truth is simply an aspiration, then you are heading for what Joseph Ratzinger famously called in 2005 the dictatorship of relativism. Because if your truth collides with my truth and there's nothing we recognize as the truth, then somebody's going to impose their power on somebody else.
Right, and it's interesting too because as you talk about, the truth was replaced by context.
Yeah, well, we heard that by a successor to Dr. Faust as president of Harvard, Dr. Gay, who in the wake of these horrendous demonstrations on the Harvard campus was asked by Representative Elise Stefanik do calls for violence against Jewish students count as
right, and
really
we're just talking about something
speech.
happened in the last year or so.
And she said, well, it depends on the context. Well, what context validates anti-Semitic and genocidal talk? I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Now, the Catholic University, you say it's more important and we need it more than ever. Why?
Because the Catholic University at its best retains what founded the university as the Western world knows it in the 12th and 13th centuries, and that is that faith and reason go together. Faith challenges reason to widen the aperture of its aspirations, not to think low, but to think high. And reason purifies faith from superstition. That was the happy marriage that made the university system in the High Middle Ages, And that is precisely what has collapsed in a lot of American higher education today.
You say in one of the first talks, you talk about there were 4 lessons for theology, because the first talk was about theology and what it meant, from the pontificate of John Paul II. And obviously he wrote the great book about his life, Witness to Hope. And you talk about the idea that doctrine is liberating. Now that runs so contradictory to the way the world sees things. Explain.
Well, we all hear descriptions of life as a journey. Well, where are you going? And what's driving you there? Doctrine is not an impediment to the journey. It's what allows you to drive it in a proper direction. Doctrine is the expression of those truths that we can know by both revelation and reason. And the great symbol of the liberating power of doctrine is in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. In the apse of the basilica is that fantastic altar of the chair, this great bronze creation by Bernini, where what is believed to be a chair used by St. Peter is encapsulated in this great bronze construction. And it's being held up by 4 doctors of the church. And what's brilliant about it is that they're holding it with their fingertips. It's not a burden. The doctrine of the church, as articulated through the ministry of the Bishop of Rome, is light. It's liberating. And Bernini caught that truth so spectacularly in that fantastic bronze sculpture.
Now, as you go through here, the various talks you gave over the various years, has your focus or message changed, or how do you decide what your message was going to be for each individual university?
Well, it depends on the school, obviously, and it depends on the what we call the signs of the times. I gave 2 commencement addresses at the University of Dallas, 14 years apart, and they are on very different topics.
Right.
Because the
Was the
cultural
university
situation
different?
had changed. No,
Also?
the cultural situation had changed.
I see.
University of Dallas is a fantastic school
Right.
that has held on to classic liberal arts education in a most impressive way.
Right.
But the external environment into which these young people were going had changed, and so I thought it was important to talk about something else. I mean, if there's a consistent theme throughout these commencement addresses, it's the challenge to young people to live vocationally, constantly asking yourself the question, what is God asking of me now?
Do people, young people today, see life as a vocation?
If they're invited to do so.
Okay.
And that's what should happen through Catholic elementary and secondary schools, youth groups, campus ministries. Don't think just career, think vocation. As I say in one of those commencement addresses, that might not make for a simple or easy life, but you'll never be bored. You'll never be bored. And boredom is the great enemy of human excellence.
Do you see that, what's going on? We have so many things going on, but people are bored.
Yeah, and people live their lives on screens, and that's not a good way to engage others and to engage the world.
In the talk, Christian Humanism versus Inhuman Humanism, you talk about atheistic humanism was a genuine novum, something really new. This was not the skepticism of individuals, this was the atheism with a developed theology. And you go and talk about people like Feuerbach and Marx and Nietzsche, all taught that God of the Bible was the enemy of human dignity. You say this, de Lubac argued, was a great reversal, for the ancient world had experienced biblical religion as liberation from the whimsies of fate.
Or the whimsies of the gods. I mean, think of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Even the strongest men, Achilles, Odysseus, are finally just playthings on a kind of cosmic gaming board, and the gods are manipulating them. Even worse, of course, were the gods of ancient Canaan, who demanded and got child sacrifice, a consistent theme of the Hebrew prophets who railed against that vile practice. A little closer to home, think of the gods of what we now know as Mexico, who, in order to appease those gods, you had the people had their hearts ripped out while they were still alive. The God of the Bible does none of that. The God of the Bible comes into history in the people of Israel, later and most completely in Jesus Christ, and says, follow me through history. I'll take you where you're supposed to be going.
Elsewhere in there you say, for John Paul II has reminded us for more than 2 decades, culture is the engine of history over the long haul. So how do we impact the culture?
Well, one thing we do is educate people. And an education that is simply functional, that only prepares people for employment, is not a truly civilized or even Christian education. I have constantly run into parents who do not seem to understand what's going on in the so-called elite schools of American higher education, and who think that if the kid doesn't get into Harvard or Yale or Stanford or Duke, they're ruined for life. I said it's absolute nonsense. Take my 2 daughters, for example. Both went to the University of Dallas. One then went to Johns Hopkins Medical School, is now a practicing pediatrician and a notable commentator on medical ethics issues. The other went to New York University for a degree in arts education, now runs the education program at the biggest arts center in New York.
Wow.
So you can do anything with a liberal arts education. But it also makes you or prepares you to be someone who is learning throughout their entire life.
Right. So is The Boys of Summer your favorite baseball book?
It's certainly one of them. It's certainly one of them. That's right. I quote.
Talking about Jackie Robinson in this situation, even though you were a diehard Orioles fan.
That's right. I mean, but I was Frank Robinson, who was right behind Jackie Robinson and coming into the majors in the 50s, was my idol. I mean, I have never seen anybody bend a game to his will the way Frank did. He was something.
He came up with Cincinnati, didn't he?
He did, and then Cincinnati made arguably the dumbest trade in history. They got a good pitcher, Milt Pappas, who won,
was Milt Pappas,
only guy who's won 100 games in both leagues.
Yeah, he was a good pitcher at the time.
Milt Pappas was a great pitcher, but I mean, he wasn't Frank Robinson.
Right, absolutely. They found out that later. In one other one, Making Your Soul, I thought this was interesting. In Mount St. Mary University in Emmitsburg, in the talk you talked about an Italian bishop who thought putting Bob Dylan on singing "Blow in the Wind" before John Paul II was a good idea. Seems like the church continues to do stuff like that.
Well, some parts of the church, do. That was really hilarious, because as I continued that story, you know, Dylan is singing in front of 500,000 Italians at the closing of a National Eucharistic Congress. Finishes with "Blowing in the Wind." John Paul II jettisons his prepared text, riffs for 25 minutes on the Holy Spirit blowing through the church, preparing us for the Great Jubilee. And then 2 days later, I'm at the papal dining room table for lunch and work on Witness to Hope, and he looks at me and says, "Who is Bob Dylan?"
The other one I want to get to just quick before, Veritatis Splendor, Gift of the Church in the World, and this was a talk you gave actually in Krakow in 2018. That was such a powerful work, and I think it really helped a lot of us, you know, in kind of as a post-Vatican II, talking about your other book, really gave us something to hold on to and understand. But it doesn't seem like we hear very much about that anymore.
Well, unfortunately, over the previous 12 years, there was a systematic effort in certain Roman universities to deconstruct the teaching of John Paul II in Veritatis Splendor. And that doesn't work. It can't work because he was teaching the truth. Nobody is interested in get-out-of-jail-free Catholicism. And these schools are not now attracting the best graduate students. The place in Rome, the Angelicum, the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, where I've been teaching for 4 years, every winter and spring, is getting the really good students because they don't want get-out-of-jail-free card Catholicism.
But what's the point?
Well, the point is...
I mean, if you're going to play the game and everybody's going to win, or it doesn't really matter if you play the game.
Everybody gets a trophy.
Right.
Everybody gets a trophy. Well, I'm afraid this is all in aid of, or a lot of it is in aid of advancing what we would call the LGBTQ agenda. And that requires deconstructing the notion that some things are just off the board, period. Now, most normal human beings understand that, that there are what we technically call intrinsically evil acts. What would ever justify rape, torturing children? But, you know, there are moral theologians, including some in Rome, who have twisted themselves into pretzels, saying, well, there might be, in the abstract, intrinsically evil acts. We can't know in this particular circumstance, well, whether that's true or not. No. What happened to Charlie Kirk? What happened in that church in Minnesota? Go through the list. These are intrinsically evil acts, period. And if you don't understand that, you are a moral idiot. And the Catholic Church needs to be saying that with more force these days.
I don't want to get into why they're not. Men of genius, you talk about John Paul II, Benedict XVI, John Henry Newman, who's now the doctor of the church, and I think you think, based upon this, John Paul II certainly should be. But Michael Novak, I was interested. Why did you include Michael Novak? I had the great pleasure of interviewing him once. So.
Mike and I were dear friends for 25 years, and in his quasi-retirement, Ave Maria University in Florida had a symposium on the various aspects of his work. And I was asked to kind of wrap that up with both a personal reminiscence, but what he had contributed to so many different fields, philosophy, theology, thinking about sports, American diplomacy, a new way of understanding economics. This was a remarkable talent, and I was happy to be able to bear witness to that down at Ave Maria. And I thought it belonged in this book.
So that's Pomp, Circumstance, and Unsolicited Advice. Last couple of minutes, I wanted to touch on your earlier work, To Sanctify the World, the Vital Legacy of Vatican II. Why is there so much confusion in people's minds over what the appropriate legacy is or isn't of Vatican II today?
Well, part of that is internet and silly commentary. Part of it is people don't read the documents of Vatican II. Vatican II exists, the real Vatican II exists in its teaching. And if you don't know how to read those documents in the proper order, with the proper analytic prism, if you will, you're not going to get it. Now, the reason for this book was that I thought on the 60th anniversary of the Council's opening 3 years ago, it was important to do a book that explained, particularly to young people, college students, and especially seminarians, why was the Council necessary, what did it actually teach, and how did John Paul II and Benedict XVI give it its proper interpretation. So I'm happy that the book is being used in seminaries around the country and indeed around the world today. One religious order just got me to get them 50 copies of it for their new novices. This is a book with, I hope, with legs for the future. It's not a polemic. I discuss all the things that went wrong after the Council and why that was the case. But then
what would you think was the biggest thing that went wrong and had the biggest negative impact on the Council's teaching?
I think the timing. I mean, one of the things I'm going to inquire of higher authority at some point is why did this happen right as the Western world was losing its mind in the mid to late 1960s? It just was not a cultural moment when this rich, Christ-centered call to the church to recover its idea of itself as a missionary enterprise could be heard. So we had a 20-year free-for-all over what did all this mean. The other thing, Doug...
The spirit of Vatican II.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is that unlike every previous ecumenical council, which had provided the keys to its own interpretation.
Right.
Nicene Creed tells you what
right.
Nicene 1 means. The canons of the Council of Trent tell you what that means. The definition of Our Lady as Theotokos tells you what the Council of Ephesus meant. Vatican II did none of that. So it took two men of the council, John Paul II and Benedict XVI, to give the keys. And then they also gave us the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which, as I think I describe it here, is the key chest.
Right.
It's the chest in which all of the keys to the proper interpretation
can be found.
of the council can be found.
So sometimes we hear about the continuity, and then we hear about rupture. And sometimes there's discussions about, how the council's to be looked at. There was a total change. This is all something new, as opposed to something that was a continuum.
John XXIII said in his opening address to Vatican II, which I believe is the prism through which the whole enterprise should be read, we are not here to reinvent the church. We have no authority to do that. This is Christ's church. We are here to figure out how to make the enduring truths of Catholic faith hearable in a modern world. What's worse today than even the rupture thing is this notion of paradigm shift.
Right.
The Vatican II created a paradigm shift. Well, either you don't know what a paradigm shift is, or you don't know what a council is. A paradigm shift is moving from the Earth as the center of the solar system to the sun as the center of the solar system.
Right.
That's a major change. Catholic Church does not do paradigm shifts. It does, as the about-to-be doctor of the church, John Henry Newman, demonstrated, it does do the development of doctrine, but that means drawing out of the key chest themes that may have gotten lost, that may not have been fully developed, but it's continuity as the basis of renewal and reform.
Some people would say, well, we really didn't, the church was doing so great in the late 50s, et cetera, like that. And then others would say, well, if that was the case, then why did it collapse in so many ways so quickly?
The church was not doing great in the 50s in Europe, for example. And at the time of Vatican II, 50% of the world's Catholics lived in Europe. I mean, we were doing okay here. But Europe had just had 2 world wars in which it basically tried to destroy itself. Christian continent. Massive secularization. Something had to be done to reignite Christian faith in what Joseph Ratzinger in 1958 said was a continent that used to turn pagans into Christians.
Right.
But now has Christians who live like pagans. John XXIII understood that, and let's just make a couple of other points along this line. No Vatican II, no Karol Wojtyła, John Paul II. No Vatican II, no fantastic growth of the church in sub-Saharan Africa.
Right, you make that point.
Over the last 30 years.
Why was that so helpful to that area of the world?
Because it reignited the missionary impulse in the church and brought African churchmen into the center of the church's life. And they are now the great defenders of Catholic Orthodoxy, as at the last 2 synods.
Right. Well, of all the documents in Vatican II, what's the most important one you would think somebody should be aware of?
The most important one, I would say, is the Dogmatic Constitution on Divine Revelation. It's not very long. It makes very good spiritual reading, and it is a powerful testimony to the fact that we do not live in a world of silence, that God has spoken into this world in His written word, and in the Word, the incarnate Word, Jesus Christ. And then after that is the Dogmatic Constitution on the Church, which is a beautiful reflection on the complex reality of the Church and the fact that each of us is called in baptism to be a missionary disciple.
So where do you see the future lies for the church? Do you see it in the Benedict smaller, more orthodox, or what do you think?
Well, I think that statement of Ratzinger, as he then was largely misunderstood.
Okay.
I mean, he wasn't calling for downsizing.
Right.
He just said, look, in the nature of things,
Right.
at least in the so-called developed world, the North Atlantic world,
Right.
you're going to have to choose to be Catholic.
Right.
And that means the church is going to be more intentional, probably going to be smaller,
Right.
but it'll be more intentional and more convicted, as our evangelical friends say, of the truths of Catholic faith. What he did not expect, I think nobody expected at that point, is this exponential growth of the church in sub-Saharan Africa. That will be the demographic center of the world church in the next 40 years.
Do you have another book in the works?
I don't at the moment. I think 30 books since 1987. I've killed enough trees for the moment.
Okay.
But I might get provoked enough by something to write a book.
Oh, well, if you do, we'd always have an open invitation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Doug.
George Weigel, 2 books, Pomp, Circumstance, and Unsolicited Advice, his new book, and another book, From the Recent Past to Sanctify the World, the Vital Legacy of Vatican II, both worth your time and both worth your purchase from EWTN's religious catalog, EWTNRC.com. I'm Doug Keck. This has been Bookmark. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time.